The sound of chains hitting the concrete echoed through the vast metal corridor. Hundreds of tattooed men, their heads shaved and their faces cold, were marched single file into a place that looked less like a prison and more like a factory for punishment. Bare feet on the floor. Eyes forward. No talking. Cameras watched from every corner. Soldiers with rifles lined the walls. The moment the gates of CECOT, the Terrorism Containment Center, slammed shut, the world witnessed something that had never been seen before. 15,000 men, all accused of being members of El Salvador's most feared gangs, MS-13 and Barrio 18, were packed into one colossal, steel fortress surrounded by miles of fences and armed guards. For them this wasn't just prison. It was the end of the world. The guards shouted commands in Spanish, their voices sharp like knives. The inmates had to kneel on the ground, one behind another, their tattooed backs and heads gleaming under the floodlights. No shoes. No mattresses. No sunlight. No visitors. Only rules, cold and absolute. When President Nayib Bukele showed the first footage of this new mega prison to the world, people couldn't believe their eyes. The video spread everywhere. Men sitting in rows like chess pieces, hands behind their heads, watched by soldiers in masks. Bukele called it, the prison where the bad guys will never come out again. For many citizens of El Salvador, it was justice at last. For others it was fear made real. But on that first morning inside CECOT, things were already falling apart. A sudden alarm blared across the yard. Soldiers shouted, pushing inmates to the floor. The lights went out for a moment and in the darkness, a voice screamed. By the time the lights flickered back, one man lay bleeding on the concrete, beaten by other inmates for speaking when he shouldn't have. His name was Jorge, once a member of Barrio 18. Now he was just another number in the world's biggest prison. The guards didn't move to help him right away. They waited. In CECOT, time doesn't move fast. It crawls and every second is heavy. To understand how it all began, we have to step back. Before the chains, before the shouting, before CECOT became a word of fear. El Salvador was once a small country with a big problem. With a population of just 6 million, it was losing more than 3,000 people every year to gang violence. The streets were ruled by MS-13 and Barrio 18, two rival gangs that controlled entire neighborhoods, from San Salvador to the small towns along the coast. People paid rent, not for homes but for protection. Bus drivers were killed for refusing. Teenagers disappeared for joining the wrong side. Mothers lived in silence because speaking out meant death. Then came Nayib Bukele, a young president who promised to end it all. In 2022, he launched a nationwide crackdown called the State of Exception. It gave soldiers and police the power to arrest anyone suspected of gang activity. No warrants, no court hearings, no questions. Within months, over 75,000 people were arrested. Some were gang members. Some were not. Bukele called it the war against the gangs. At first, people celebrated. Murders dropped overnight. Streets once haunted by gunfire were suddenly quiet. Markets reopened. Families could walk after dark again. The president's popularity skyrocketed. People said he had done what no other leader dared to try. But for others, the families of the arrested, the war brought another kind of pain. Mothers cried outside police stations, holding pictures of sons who vanished overnight. He was not a gangster, they said. He worked at a bakery, or he was a student. The police didn't respond. The cells were already full. Then came the news, a new prison was being built. One unlike any other. Hidden deep in the hills of Tecoluca, surrounded by electric fences and army checkpoints, the CECOT facility was designed to hold 40,000 prisoners, more than any other in the world. 8 separate buildings, each the size of a city block, watched from above by drones and towers with snipers. Inside there were no phones, no sunlight, no privacy. The cells had metal beds and concrete toilets. Food came twice a day, beans, tortillas, and water. The lights stayed on 24 hours. The prisoners could not speak unless spoken to. When the first wave of inmates arrived, it was like watching an army of ghosts. Tattoos told their stories, faces of saints, numbers, tears under eyes. Some had lived their whole lives inside gang rules. Now they lived inside prison rules, and those were even harsher. A former gang member named Luis, who managed to escape arrest, later told a journalist from abroad, "They don't talk to you in there. They don't even look at you. You're not a person anymore. You're a warning to everyone outside." The government called it success. They said crime had dropped by more than 60%. Tourists started coming back. Cafes reopened in neighborhoods that used to be war zones. President Bukele even hosted the Miss Universe pageant in 2023, telling the world that El Salvador was now safe, the safest country in the Americas. But behind those massive gray walls of CECOT, things were not as perfect as they looked on camera. Reports began to leak, prisoners dying from lack of medical care, men fainting from hunger, others beaten for disobedience. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch raised alarms, saying that innocent people were being held without proof, sometimes just for having a tattoo or living in the wrong area. Still, Bukele didn't slow down. "You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs," he said in one speech. "We're breaking the cycle of terror." And for many Salvadorans that was enough. They were tired of burying their sons. Tired of fear. For them, CECOT was not a nightmare, it was relief. But deep inside that prison, under the constant hum of fluorescent lights, something else was happening. The gangs, stripped of weapons, still whispered through the walls. They used taps, code words, and even the rhythm of their footsteps to send messages. Soldiers patrolled day and night, but even steel can't stop silence from spreading. One night, as rain pounded the roof and thunder rolled across the valley, an alarm sounded again. Guards rushed down the corridor, their boots slapping the wet floor. In cell block 6, something had gone wrong. Two rival groups, men from Barrio 18 and MS-13, were in the same section for the first time. Someone screamed. The lights flickered. And what happened next inside that cell block would shake even the soldiers who thought they had seen it all. To be continued? The corridor was chaos. Flashing red lights strobed against the steel walls as guards poured into Block 6, rifles raised. The sound of boots and shouting filled the air, echoing like thunder inside the endless halls. The prisoners, all shirtless and tattooed from neck to ankle, were forced to the ground. But one group wasn't moving fast enough. Then came the scream, long, sharp, and cut short. By the time the soldiers reached the cell, 2 men were already down, and blood snaked slowly across the concrete. The air was thick and sour. No weapons were visible. In CECOT there were no knives, no sharp metal, just hands, bones, and fury. The captain barked orders in Spanish and floodlights blazed to life. Every man in the cell was dragged out, thrown to their knees, hands locked behind their heads. The guards searched the room again and again but found nothing. Only the tattooed faces, the cold stares, and the quiet breathing of men who had long stopped fearing pain. When the security footage was reviewed later that night, it showed something chilling. A silent argument between 2 inmates moments before the fight broke out. They were both old rivals, one from MS-13, the other from Barrio 18. They weren't supposed to even see each other, let alone share a cell block. Somehow someone made a mistake. And inside CECOT, one mistake could start a war. That night the prison went into lockdown. No food. No showers. No light except the white glare of surveillance bulbs that never went out. Every inmate was stripped down to the floor in lines, motionless, heads down. The soldiers walked between them like statues, scanning faces for any sign of movement. Outside, the rain still fell over the massive concrete compound. From above, CECOT looked like a spaceship dropped in the middle of the jungle. Walls 10 meters high, electrified fences, floodlights carving the darkness. Reporters weren't allowed in that night. The government released no statement. Inside one of the control towers, an officer named Captain Rivera watched the monitors. "These men," he said quietly to his partner, "used to rule the streets. Now look at them." His voice was flat, not proud, not angry, just tired. For a moment the two sat in silence, watching the sea of prisoners through flickering screens. Rows of men, heads shaved, tattoos telling stories of murders, loyalty, and loss. Some had tears inked under their eyes, marks earned long before CECOT. Others had saints tattooed on their chests, as if faith might protect them in a place built to erase humanity. But far away from the prison walls, another story was unfolding. In a small neighborhood in San Salvador, a mother named Marisol waited every day at a police station, holding a photo of her son, Daniel. He was 19 when soldiers came for him, accused of being a gang lookout. "He worked in a car wash," she told anyone who would listen. "He's not a gangster." But nobody answered her. Nobody could. Daniel was gone, one of tens of thousands swept up in the crackdown. Every morning, Marisol stood under the same tree, waiting for a name to appear on a list of released prisoners. It never did. Sometimes, other mothers joined her. They prayed together, cried together, and held their photos close like evidence of existence. When reporters asked about cases like hers, the government said, "Mistakes happen in every war." President Bukele's approval rating stayed sky-high. Streets were safer. Homicides were down by 90%. The people loved him, or feared him, or both. He called himself the world's coolest dictator, half joking, half proud. But not everyone saw safety in the silence. A local journalist, Carlos Mejia, decided to investigate CECOT's reality. With hidden cameras and interviews, he collected stories from guards and released prisoners. One officer described nights when men screamed for hours. Another said some cells had 80 inmates and no windows. "We are told not to look them in the eye," the guard said. "Not because of fear, but because if we see them as people, it gets harder to do this job." Carlos tried to publish his findings. But within a week, his article was taken down. He started receiving calls from unknown numbers. Then one night his car was followed. The next morning he fled the country. Back inside CECOT, order was slowly restored. The 2 inmates involved in the fight were taken away. No one saw them again. The rest were punished with days of isolation. No food, no contact, no sound. Only the hum of electricity and the echo of their own breathing. One prisoner, a man named Elias, who had been in MS-13 since he was 14, whispered to another, "They think this is the end. But the gangs don't die. They wait." It was dangerous to talk like that, even more dangerous to believe it. But he had a point. Outside the country, in Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico, the remaining leaders of both gangs were regrouping. The crackdown in El Salvador had cut off their roots but not their reach. Some began moving north, smuggling weapons and orders across borders. President Bukele knew this and he was ready. He increased military patrols at the borders, ordered new raids in cities, and promised to fill CECOT until not one criminal walks free. And he meant it. The prison kept growing, new cell blocks opening every few months. The soldiers built faster than ever. Human rights groups kept protesting, but the people didn't care. They finally slept without gunfire. For them, CECOT was working. Then came the night of the inspection. A high-ranking government team arrived at midnight to tour the prison. Cameras rolling, lights blazing, soldiers standing at attention. President Bukele himself was rumored to be coming. The guards cleaned every hall, scrubbed every floor, and lined the inmates up in perfect rows. But somewhere deep inside the facility, a small group of prisoners had found a way to break a rule. One that could change everything. As the president's convoy rolled through the gates, one guard whispered to another, "Did you hear what they found in Block 4? The other shook his head. "A message," the guard said quietly. "Written on the wall in blood." No one spoke after that. The cameras kept rolling. The world was about to see a side of CECOT it was never meant to see. To be continued.